Aloha nui. As we continue on with Hawaiian Cosmogonies, we'll continue on from the Kumulipo and look at some more important uh, traditional so-called creation stories, cosmogonies. And again, to remember that these cosmogonies really help to give you a deep understanding of philosophies, the spiritualities, ideas of morality, history, genealogy, poetry, and all these important cultural cornerstones are captured from our cosmogonies. So this is why we spend a lot of time and looking at these stories. And like the great words of George Helm, far worse than man not having land is man not having identity, aspects of culture, pride, self-esteem, dignity. And I would, again suggest that Hawaiian cosmogonies like Hemele Kumulipo, provide lots of those cornerstones. Some things to kind of remember as we continue on is that these stories are a collection. Yeah, so they're collection. You have various uh, variations of these stories. And they all have a piece of the truth. And again, to remember in Hawaiian philosophy, they don't have that sense of having to have this one and only and the story. But think of it as versions of story that serves particular purposes. And these stories, again, because they provide guidance, deep culture. So even out of the Kumulipo, when you look, if you remember the Wakia, who comes out from the Opu Upu and the Ololo genealogy, and Haumea, who comes down from the Paliku genealogy, and they mate and get together, provide their children. This is really in that part of the Kumulipo. So this is a cosmogony in of itself also that stands by itself, but it's also found within the Kumulipo. So this is part of the complexity. Yeah. So in this story, generally we kind of talk about this story as where the Kumulipo is. How does it all begin? It just begins at a foundation out of darkness. With the Wakia and Haumea or Wakia and Papa story, it's really talking about how the so-called ancestral gods and the divinity in their relations and the sexual relations, production, how they produce the world. Yeah, so the world is produced in a sense in a sexual reproductive process. Yeah, kind of male and female. And Wakia represents that which is above the sky, the heavens, and Papa, and it then represents the power of the earth itself. One of the more famous versions, and this is one of the versions that tells the story about Papa Wake, is Melia Pakui. O Wakia kahiko lua mea o papa hanau moku tawaini hanau taiti tu taiti moe hanau tia papa nuu hanau tia papalani hanau Hawaii ka moku makaiapo. And it's a long chant also that kind of provides us how the world is created with these ancestral gods in their mating, and they produce the various levels of the heavens and the um, those uh, the pillars that hold up the sky and the horizon to, in fact, the birth of the islands. And so this is that part of the story where the islands, in fact, itself, the land itself, is produced through sexual reproduction. Yeah, called the Melia Pakui. Now, Pakui was said to have been a kahuna out of Molokai, and he was his version also that was used a lot as a resource for many of the early writers at Lahaina Luna. So this version called Melia Pakui is a well-known so-called creation melody that you hear all over also. Yeah. And we're not going to actually look at the particulars of the Melia. I'll be sharing some of the story, but as the story kind of goes, and I'll kind of give you an abridged story. So you have Wakia and Papa, and this is again has different variations in how the islands appear, but the variation you need to know will come from this particular story. Ohaloa Kawai Mualoa. We're going to use this as the backdrop also. Yeah, so make sure you guys take a read of this. I have the link I had posted. And the thing to remember, these books, they're in Hawaiian. However, the translation is at the end of the book. So please look at the end of the book to see the translation, unless you read Hawaiian, of course. But so, as kind of going back, as the story goes in this story of the Melia Pakui, Hawaii is the first island. Hawaii is born, and then it's Maui. And I'm kind of going to do the shortened version. So I'm kind of mixing different versions, kind of make it simple. But think of Hawaii Island first appearing, and then Maui. And they're both products of Wakea and Papa. Well, as the story the adult story goes, Wakea wants to mate with um, Hohoku Kalani. And again, when you read the story of Haloa, you'll find that there. And Hohoku Kalani. And in order to mate with Hohoku Kalani, he seeks the help of his kahuna Kamo'ava. And in talking to his kahuna Kamo'ava, the guidance is for him to set up what becomes the kapu system, the kapu system, the eating kapu system, which regulates and provides guidelines and everyday practices, relations, and of course, the kapu of eating, the sacred eating. And it's on these nights that the so-called moon calendar is set up, which provides that on particular nights of the moon, the Kamoava says that the men would have to go to the temple to do prayers. Well, this is on those nights where Wakia is able to, leave the side of Papa to go off and pursue Hohokukalani. Well, and he's told by his kahuna Kamo'awa, make sure, yeah, before sunrise, yeah, you head back home because you know what's going to happen if Papa finds out. And well, you can kind of figure out what happens in the story. And this is when one early morning, Kamo'ava, the kahuna, wakes up. He realizes Wakia still hasn't gone back. So he does this chant, basically a morning chant that says, you better get your butt up and get home before you get caught. Too late. Papa comes out and she sees Wakia exiting from the house of Hohokulani, and he knows that, of course, yeah, they spent the night together. She's furious. She throws a huge tantrum. There's a huge fight in different versions. I mean, they basically struggle it out. And she leaves and she says, the hell with you. I'm going to head back home. And so she leaves Hawaii and she said to go back to Nu'umealani. Now, Nu'umealani or Nu'umehalani we see as an ancient place name. Nu'umealani, sometimes people refer to that probably as being connected with what today we call the Marquesas Islands, the southern Marquesas Islands. So she's gone. She goes back home. Well, what does Wakia does? Well, Wakia moves on. And again, you can find part of this is also in the reading by Malo. Yeah, he talks about the same names and stories. And, Wakia says, the hell with that. I'm going to go out. And he goes out and he hooks up with another goddess by the name of Hina. Yeah, Hina. Hence, that's why the island of Molokai is produced in this relationship. And that's why Molokai is called Molokai Nui Ahina, great Molokai of Hina, the goddess Hina. Well, that doesn't stop him there. He hooks up with another so-called goddess, Kaula Wahine. Yeah, so Kaula Wahine, and again, you can see this in the reading of Malo. It's another goddess, and in that relationship with Wakia, the child is Lanai. Yeah, uh, Lanai Kaula. Yeah, for Kaula Wahine, and Lanai is produced. Yeah, and well, as the story goes from the Melia Pakui, they talk about in that chant where this kolea, if you guys know the kolea, the golden plover, that's that bird you see running around on the grass, especially in the winter time when the whales come, same time. And his golden plover is one of those migratory birds that flies away and flies back. Anyway, in the story, this kolea in this chant, he flies up from Hawaii, and the kolea represents like a navigator, a sailor, a traveler. And he goes off and he finds Papa and her homeland, and he tells Papa, "Hey, you know what's going on? Wakia, Wakia is, he has a baby with Hina, he has a baby with Kaulo Wahine, and of course, this is when uh, uh, who opupuna naina, and the anger of Papa. Basically, she snaps. She gets very very angry. They hell with him, and I'm gonna get him back, and such and such. And of course, in true Hawaiian drama and fashion, how does she get him back? Well, she goes off and mates with her own guy, and his name is Ahu Kini Alaha. So then it's the name Ahu Kini Alaha. Yeah. Sometimes you have different versions of Oahu Alua. Sometimes the word Lua you might see, or Ahu Kini. Yeah, so Lua probably is the one that most people, Oahu Alua is people. So Oahu is not Wakia's child, but Lua's child, or Ahu Kini, depends on the story. Well, like Hawaiian drama, well, of course, Wakia and Papa get back together, and this is how Kauai and then Niihau is formed. And then finally, in this shortened, abridged version of what I want you guys to know is the island of Kaho'olawe is mentioned. He Ulaa o Kaho'olawe. So some of you might be familiar with that particular chant. Yeah. O wakia nohoya papa hanau moku, hanau Hawaii hemoku, hanau Maui hemoku. Yeah. Ho wakia nohoya hohoklani, hanau omolaka i hemoku, hanau lana i hemoku. Yeah. And so the story you need to know in regards to the mating, right? Papawakia, the so-called islands. The sequence is Hawaii Island and Maui between Wakia and Papa. Then Molokai between Wakia and Hina. Lanai, Wakia and Kaula Wahine. And then Oahu, this is when you have Papa with Lua or Ahukini, Papa and Lua. And then finally, they get back together, Wakia and Papa, and they have Kauai and Ni'ihau. And what's interesting, last of all, is they mention He Ula o Kaho'olawe, where Kaho'olawe is mentioned as an Ula. Ula is a color red. Again, what is the poetry? Many people believe the color red represents, of course, this idea of the sacred deity in and of itself. And in fact, that's why Kaho'olawe, its ancient traditional name was Kanaloa, or Kohem Malamalama o Kanaloa. Now, in this story also, while all of this is going on, right, now we're going to jump back to the story of Haloa. Okay, so now you remember when Wakia goes off to see Hokukalani. Well, Papa leaves, she's angry, she's gone. Well, Wakia and Hokukalani have a child, and the first child is stillborn, and his name is Haloa. Yeah, and he's actually given the whole name Haloa Naka Lau Kapalili. Haloa, the long ha, the long like stalk. Naka, naka means like to like shake like this. Yeah, naka, tremble maybe. Naka. Lau is the leaf, and in kapalili is like the taro moves in the wind. So his whole name Haloa Naka Lau Kapalili, and again you can see the name in the story. Now, what happens is when she's hapai with Haloa Nakalau Kapalili, it's she gives birth and it's a stillborn child. Now the kahuna kamoawa, same kahuna says, hey, take that child, do this prayer, and go and plant. In Hawaiian, we use the word kanu. The word kanu in Hawaiian is the word to bury, like how we bury it, but it's the same word we use to plant. So in Hawaiian thinking, when you put a dead body in the ground, you're literally planting that person in the ground. And so this child, Haloa Nakalau Kapalili, is kanu into the ground. And of course, from this kanu comes the first so-called taro plant, the kalo comes out of this plant. And this is just to signify this is how important that this plant was, even in the mythologies, that is incorporated right into the cornerstone, really, the fabric of our genealogy. So, well, Wakia and Hohokalani, they have a second child. And the second child is born healthy, he's born, and he becomes the ancestor, in fact, of all Kanaka, all Hawaiians. Yeah, their common ancestor is Haloa. So many times you hear Hawaiians talk about Haloa, you hear Hawaiians talking about our relations with the taro, and that's why in this mythology, the taro itself, in this family, is an older sibling. Yeah, in Hawaiian, we say the kaiko'ana, elder sibling. In Hawaiian, the so-called Kanaka is the kaikaina, the younger sibling. Again, you'll find this in the story. And the second child is named Haloa in reverence of his older sibling, the first Kalo. So we have the oldest, Haloa Nakalau Kapalili, and then the second named Haloa also. And Haloa goes on to become the ancestor of all Kanaka, all Hawaiians. And it's interesting in the story, again, you think about, in the sexual relationships that create the world around, the first lands, the island itself are the eldest of the family, and then not the eldest, but the eldest within this nuclear family, I guess, because the heavens and skies and everything else is also created. But the islands are older than, of course, the kalo, the taro, and then next would be the human. That's interesting kind of way of seeing the world. That's why in Hawaiian we have many sayings like hanau ka'aina, hanau keli'i, hanau ke kanaka, or aheli ika aina he kawa ke kanaka. Yeah, land is the chief, humans are its servants. This idea of holding up in this kind of hierarchical family, that the land, then the kalo, and then the human. Now in Hawaiian thinking, that makes perfect sense, right? We as Kanaka, we cannot come before the taro. What are we going to eat, right? So, and the taro cannot survive without the land. Yeah. So again, you can see there's a logical reason why this hierarchy exists. Yeah, there's no way that humans can come before, and so forth. But it also teaches us how we again have this familial relationship with everything around us. Yeah, we are related to everything. Yeah, what we do to the kalo, it depends upon the land itself, right? If the kalo is healthy, that means the land is healthy, and that means we are healthy. Well, the opposite true, right? If the land is sick, the kalo will be sick, and the kanaka will be sick. So it naturally kind of through these stories gives us a very strong, you want to call it environmentalistic look at the world. His philosophy is a foundational idea within Hawaiian culture. Yeah, so land itself isn't just we just care for land because it's nice, but again, seeing land as being not just divine but also familial, and also built in not just familial but the sense of the need to care because that which feeds us takes care of us. So again, in the Hawaiian family system, the kaikwana kaikaina, the older siblings will care for the young. Yeah, the younger ones honor and listen to the older. And within this, again, this framework and story, um, I just mentioned the words kaiko ana and kaikaina again, which is on the story. But this idea, even within the Hawaiian family, you have the older and the younger. So even the land itself is an older sibling than the taro, and the taro is an older sibling than the kanaka. Yeah, and again, the thing to understand is that these are so important, especially the kalo. It's fused into our cosmogonies and stories. Another important story, I'm just going to run real quickly through some of these, is another song, another creation song. It's called Melea Kahakui Kamoana. And over mai Hawaii nu ya ke mai loko mai ka po puka mai ka muka ai na kalala ni ai no nu me ka pai ni kukuluka ki hana o mau he moke na ka kama kama valo he no. But it talks about the birth of the island, not in the sense of birthing, but if you look at the lines, ea mai, that first word, the word ea means to rise up from below. And this is a chant that basically talks about the islands itself coming from below, right? Below from the ocean. And again, you kind of think it's very logical, right? And everybody can go to Hawaii Island right now. You can go look at Hale Ma'uma. You can go and see, you can see the island growing right now. You can see that lava. Pele is actually making land. And so it's real logical to understand, well, these islands are volcanic. And volcanic islands come from below. You can see, you can witness it with your own eyes. And so it talks about not just the coming of the land, but then it's talking about the various migrations of different so-called ali'i and from different lands come to reside on these islands. And in real specific, a connection to all the islands in the south, the rest of so again, the idea of our consciousness for Hawaiians wasn't as if we saw ourselves as out in the middle of the world, not knowing there's anybody else out there, but we clearly understood through our stories that we came from other areas to Hawaii. And we also have all these relations with others in the Pacific. And you find this in our songs also. And again, there is a scientific base to this, right? That the islands were created through volcanic action. Now, another important cosmogony we need to learn is kind of a group of stories that are called the Kumuhonua, so-called legends. And the name itself gives you a little bit idea of what this story is about. The word kumu, same as the kumulipo, the source, the foundation, the beginning, the start of something. Yeah, kumu. Honua is the earth. So the idea is the earth as the foundation of the earth. So if we think about those three, remember those three kinds of cosmogonies? Yeah, we had the kumulipo. How does it start? It just starts. Sexual reproduction, the Papawakea story. But a kumuhonua, this is when the so-called the divine God and gods will create the world. If you take a look at this picture here, some of you on Oahu specifically should recognize, yeah, this is mo kapu. Yeah, mo kapu. And of course, you hear the word kapu, yeah, that which is sacred, there's revered. And Mokapu today is occupied by the United States Marines, the Marine Air Corps Station of Kaneohe. But in our stories, this is in fact one of the sites of where the first human was created in our stories at the Kumuhonua. And it kind of goes like this, and you find a reading. This is the Kamakau reading on origins. Yeah, Kamakau reading, a PDF is actually in the folder also, and 3 or 4 pages. But in the Kumuhonua story, yeah, and you have the three of the four major Hawaiian gods. Yeah, you're gonna hear over and over Kane, the same Kane from the Kumulipo, Ku and Lono, and then Kanaloa is the fourth, But in this particular story, it's like three against one. So Kani Quinlono kind of represents the good Akua, and Kanaloa is kind of put made to become like the bad person, the antagonist. But it starts off by saying there was nothing, there was a void. This it kind of described in Hawaiian as a sense of it's becoming. It hasn't yet became, but it's becoming. This sense of things are, you know, incomplete. Yeah. And we have all these different poiakua. There's real nothing physical yet. Yeah. And so they decide the pukolu aku, the word pukolu means the three of them get together, unite their powers, and they're going to create with their mana, yeah, their spiritual force, their power. They're going to create the heavens and the earth. Kane was seen to be the superior one, the one with most power as the elder, and he had the most mana and knowledge. And then you had Ku and Lono, who were there also as part of the three. And because they put their mana together, they were able to establish the world. Now, an interesting part, and just jump into this story. Again, you can find it's in the reading, but the story they get there, three of them get together and then decide, they're gonna create a being like in their image, just like them. And so they decide to create the first human, and his name is Kane Huli Honua, or sometimes just Kumu Honua, but Kane Huli Honua. Again, it's in the story. Kane Huli Honua means to turn and face towards the ground. And that's the first human man that's created. He's created out of the sand, the dirt, out of Kahakahakea at Mokapu. And and some versions he uses a stick to draw in the ground, and then he bends down and he blows with his the breath of life is put into the nostrils, and the sense of breathing is a sign of life, and he comes alive. And in the prayer, it's interesting is that the three of them join together in prayer, and the first is Kane, and he pronounces these words, Hikivaweola, 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 which is kind of a strange translation, which literally means I have reached, I have arrived, you shall live. And he does it, and then Ku and then Lona do it also, and because of their power, this being comes out from the dirt, comes to become human. And his name is Kani Huli Honua. And after a while, they realize, hey, this guy look like he's lonely. They kind of see him in Hawaiian, is the word ha'o ha'o, like he's kind of like wandering, looking around, and he's staring, and he's always looking at his shadow, and he becomes lonely. And so they decide to create a partner for him, which becomes the first wahine, the five female. And she's also created from the dirt. And in this process, going back to the fourth aku, I remember Kanaloa, the kind of seen as a bad one here, he gets kind of jealous and he says, hey, I can make one too. And of course, he tries to draw in the ground and tries to bring one to life, and it doesn't come to life. Well, they're going to create a female for Kane Huli Honua. And in the same way, out of the shadow, her name is Keaka. And the word Aka means like shadow or an image or reflection, like in a mirror, is that Aka. Even like the spiritual sense of something is an Aka. In Hawaii, in prayers, we say, Naukai uh, now kia na uno kai means the aka, the essence of the food is going to be yours, and the meat or the flesh will be mine as an offering. So that's the same meaning as aka. And her name is Keaka Hulilani, or Keaka, the shadow, the image, the reflection that looks at the heavens. Yeah. And she's the first female, and they'll mate and they become create the lineage that's called the Kumuhonua genealogy. And the Kumuhonua genealogy is a whole different story, a whole different cosmology. But, however, in the Kumulipo, the Kumuhonua genealogy is also captured within Emele Kumulipo. Yeah. Okay, we're going to continue on just real quickly, some, touching. And this is also another, talking about Pele. And Pele is interesting, she's, not really a cosmogonic, but there are elements within which is important to understand cosmogony also. And talks about Pele's coming to these islands. And so I'm going to share real briefly this story. And again, you can find in the same folder, yeah, Hawaiian Cosmogonies, you can find this story. Take notice of this image here. Yeah, you have Pele represented as the fire, the lava, and the word for lava in Hawaiian is Pele also. And then she has her sister, Na Maka o Kahai. So please refer to the story. And to make a long story short, this is how the story kind of goes. Namaka Okahai and Pele are living in a place called Hapakuela. She's living there with the rest of her family at this place. Namaka Okahai, she has a guy, she has a man. His name is um, Aukele, or Aukele Nuya Aiku. Yeah, Aukele. Aukele is another name for Jupiter anyway. But um, Namaka has this guy, and this guy goes out fishing every day, and every time he goes fishing, and Namaka notices he comes back later and later, less and less fish. So she's kind of wondering, like, what the hell's going on with this guy? Well, eventually she sees him one day, and she sees his back, and his back is all scratched, and she knows, oh damn it, that's my sister. My sister, that's how she scratches, and she realizes he's having a relationship with her younger sister, which is Pele. And of course, anger grows, and they have a huge fight, and she accuses Pele. And what's an interesting part is Pele is actually not seen as the bad person in the story, in that Namaka is seen as the so-called antagonist, in that she's jealous and she's angry. And you kind of got to understand these are two sisters, and in Hawaiian thinking, yeah, they shouldn't be fighting over a guy. A guy is just a guy. Sisters, they should be stronger. Anyway, so Pele says, the hell with you, I'm going to leave. And she decides to leave, and she jumps on her canoe, Honoluluake. And when she leaves, many of her other family members come along with her to go look and search for new lands. And this is why she leaves Hapakuela to search the Pacific. And in different versions, she goes through different places. Mai, Bora, Bora, Mai, Tahiti, Tawahine, Pele, Mai, Bora, Bora, Mai, Pola, Pola, and makes her way across the Pacific and ends up at Hawaii. Sorry, let me go finish this up. Um, Anyway, so she leaves. Namako Okahai, the older sister, she's seen as this I'm gonna say ocean dragon, the best ocean mo'owahine, the best way I can describe her. And so she's pursuing Pele. She wants to hurt Pele. Well, Pele, the first place she lands in the version you need to know here is on Ni'ihau. So Pele goes on Ni'ihau. She has a magical digging stick called Pa'oa. She sticks it in the ground, and she churns and burns and creates lava. And this becomes the first settlement for her on Ni'ihau. Well, who comes along but Namako to put out her fires, and the ocean comes, and of course, Pele is forced to move, and she moves to Kauai. And again, she goes and digs at a place called Kilauea with her magic stick, Paoa. And again, Namako Okai pursues and to extinguish her fire. So she leaves Kauai, and she makes her way down the chain, being pursued by Namako Okai to Oahu, then Molokai, then Lanai, then Kaho'olawe. When you look at I think the story has it backwards again. So I want you guys to remember this. Molokai, Lanai, then Kaho'olawe. And it's on Kaho'olawe, she looks up and she sees this high mountain. Whoa! And that's Haleakala. And she thinks, there's no way she's going to be found there. And she goes to Haleakala, and eventually Namaka gets her. And in fact, Pele is said in our stories to die on Maui, and she dies, in fact, on East Maui. And in some of the versions of the story, that's why we have that place you might know, Koki Beach, Alau Island, just past Hana Town, 2 minutes past Hana Town. That's called Kaivi o Pele, the bones of Pele. That's the little hill there. And this is where her physical body dies, but her kino wairu, her spirit, goes off to Hawaii Island. And she goes to Moku Aveoveo, which is Mauna Loa. She goes to Mauna Loa to reside, Moku Aveoveo. But she moves around, and of course, we know right to this day, Pele, in fact, is in a volcanic action going on right near Halima'uma'u, or if not, into the ocean at Puna. But still, her and Namaka continue to struggle and fight. Yeah. So this story, what is the sequence? What is the sequence? Yeah, from the other direction, it starts with Ni'ihau, Kauai, Oahu, Molokai, Lanai, Kaho'olawe, Maui, and then Hawaii. Okay, that you could need to know also. And the last one, just to touch, you have other versions. This is another story called Opu Kahunoa. It's a story of a fisherman that leaves Tahiti, and he goes out fishing, and he finds a coral. He does a prayer, the guidance of his kahuna. He throws this piece of coral that his line gets snagged on into the ocean, and it comes up as an island. And they eventually will come and sail and settle on these islands, which are Hawaii. And so this is an example of a story where they leave Tahiti to come to Hawaii. And you can actually see the four names that's called the Opu Kahonua genealogy, which comes all the way down to us today. So this is another genealogy that comes from Kauai. And I'm going to stop there and continue on. Aloha.